most guys that come out are not extremely familiar with tides, and as general rules of thumb, and I keep these as general rules of thumb because it all depends on the wind and it all depends on the moon phases and everything else like that. Generally, if you're going to fish the north side, you'd really like to see it about 2 hours down. You'd like to get out at false bar 2 hours down. North bar, I would say about the same thing. You can fish high water, but generally you want to fish outgoing water on the north side. And as the tide drops, you actually want to get closer to the light. Jones's Reef, again, I bring back Jones's Reef because it's just such a productive place, can be completely insane at dead low water. So if the tide is dropping out, throwing small needlefish at Jones's on the end of the drop or the beginning of the incoming can be extremely productive. Incoming water, most guys like to fish the south side. The best time, in my opinion, to fish the Lighthouse itself would be probably the last 2 hours of incoming, and I would throw bucktails or darters depending on the wind and the moon phase and how hard that tide is actually moving and which way it's going in volume when I say how it's going, because there are times when you got outgoing water where you can't even tell that it's actually going out, and there are times where if you got a northwest screaming, it's going out faster than you can even see it. And faster than you can even retrieve your plug or your bucktail, which is the time to go to a 2.5, maybe a 3 ounce. You got to weigh all your options. There's always exceptions to every rule. But in general, you'd like to fish the north side on the drop. And when I say the drop, I mean an hour and a half, 2 hours down. And fish it all the way down into the bluffs, unless there's a hard northeast blowing. The Lighthouse itself, you really want to get the last 2 hours of income, the most productive time if you're going to make the most of your time. The south side, generally most people fish the incoming, but you never ignore the drop when you're at anywhere from Browns back west. It's always a shot. Where is Caswell's? Doesn't matter where Caswell's is. Doesn't make a difference where false bar is. Walk it and learn where the points are. That's the difference between the weekend guy and the guy who's a regular out here who's actually fishing here from Monday to Thursday, because he'll never fish Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. That's for the guy who's coming out. He'll avoid the beach at that point. The tourist guy is going to fish Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And he'll leave too early on Sunday too, because Sunday night's always hot. Sunday night is always going to be a hot night. If you're left on, there's a rule of thumb that goes on. Always get there on Thursday and never leave on Sunday. That's the way it goes. The regulars know it. The tourist guys, those guys that can't quit their job, they can't leave early, or their wife is screaming and yelling at them, they'll never get in on it because they're not going to be here during the hard bite. The hard bite's always going to be when nobody else is around, man. And that's the way it works. I don't understand. I really don't know exactly why a northeast blow just gets things going. But whether it's the drop in a barometer, whether it's just the wind itself pushing the bait, I don't know what it is. Scientifically, I have no idea. I'm a fisherman. That's what I do, But for whatever reason, a northeast in Montauk will always put fish on the beach at some point. The trick is to be here at the right time. Sometimes it's the first day, sometimes it's the second days, sometimes it's the third day. I'm fortunate enough to be here all the time and actually know when it's going to happen, because somebody's going to call me up and say, close the shop and get up here right now. And I'm guilty of doing that. I did it last Wednesday. I fished with Stewie Heath last Wednesday and we laughed our asses off all afternoon. I don't know what it is, but it puts a lot of fish on the beach. It gets the bait going. Again, not being a scientist, not being a meteorologist, I don't understand what the low pressure does to the bait or to the fish themselves, but it puts them on the beach, and it just gets them in tight. I would imagine it probably blows the bait into the beach more than anything else. I would think that the bait is looking for shelter. But the dropping barometer has to have something to do with it, because even if the bait's not there, the fish just show up. When it really starts honking, man, you got to be very careful, especially in areas where you always fish. The water gets enormous. It gets huge. you really don't have to wait out anywhere. I mean, what you do, instead of waiting out anywhere, you get in up to maybe your knees, and you take it again. You're still taking it on the chin. You're taking it on the chest. You're taking it. You're going to get knocked down. You beef up your tackle. You beef up the size of your bucktail. Most of the time, you're going to be bucktailing. There are times where there are a few other plugs that will go. And I gotta say, I gotta mention one plug in particular, John Haverick. When Hab was alive, he made a plug called a Nightingale, which was about a 2-ounce needlefish that had nothing but a single side wash on the back with no chance of ripping the treble hook out. It was wired through, it was shot through, you had the big treble on the back, and that was another one that you could throw. And fortunately, Ron DiCostanza makes a plug that's very similar to it called the Blast, which actually I think he took because I named it the Blast, if I'm not mistaken. And you can throw that too. You don't want anything with a bunch of hooks on it. You want something with a single hook on it. You want something you can launch out there that you're not going to tear out, and you're just going to beef it up a little bit. Thing is, it usually happens during the week, not during the weekend, and the only guys out here are the guys who fish it every day. So 99 times out of 100 is all the same guys standing in the same spot, and we all know how to fish together, so it's all good that way. Probably the guy who's frequented this place more than anybody else over the years, from the beginning, from when Freddie Shea opened it in 87 out here, 85 in the circle, would probably be Jack Yee, my buddy. Jack started fishing out here, I guess, in the mid-60s. He was one of the early wetsuit guys. Jack, another friend of mine, John Thomas, who came out of Hicksville, he's a retired tin knocker. He was an early wetsuiter. There was a lot of guys then, in the late 50s and the early 60s, who put on those horrible rubber wetsuits. My God, they weighed a ton. They were soaking wet. They were ice cold. You had to wear pantyhose to put them on. It was powder, and what torture. What a nightmare those poor bastards had to go through. But they caught fish. When I think of Montauk surf casting, and I think of guys who actually really put a dent in it and really made a mark, Joe Bragan is always going to be the first guy that comes to mind. Joe is just a spectacular man. He's an unbelievable fisherman with more stamina than I've ever seen in a guy. I mean, he will swim to spots unknown. He's got his own rock. A lot of guys know where it is. Some guys don't. That's fine. Joe Bragan is always going to be top dog in my book. Jack Yee is always going to be right up there as well because of all of the fish that he's taken. There are just so many guys that really left their mark. Denny O'Connell did it hard with a high 60s. I mean, he did a 64 during the moratorium, and Denny fished hard. I know he did. Campo's crew had a lot of guys. Bragan used to call them the Rat Pack. The Murderers Row guys were all fun. There's a lot of them, but in my book, in my head, when I think Montauk surf casting, Joe Bragan is always the guy who pops into my head. Always. Joe Bragan is always the guy in my skull. Being in Montauk Point means that my season is somewhat limited. May to November is pretty much when I'm pretty much active. December, January, February, March, April we start getting the squid, April we start getting flounder. So it's kind of a short season. It's a little harrowing, and it gets a little, you can drive yourself crazy because boredom just breeds craziness, and you can't let yourself get bored. Fortunately, I build a lot of rods. I do a lot of repairs. I'm a Van Stall warranty center and repair center. So that kind of keeps me busy during the winter. But if I'm not upstairs and nobody's fishing, you tend to get a little antsy, because the season's not here. That one just ended. This one's coming. It tends to get a little crazy just anticipating the season coming up, It's different than when I was in construction 12 months a year. You're used to that paycheck every week. And when that paycheck's not coming in every week, you start to get a little crazy. And if you got a wife, which I do, she might get a little crazy too, because that paycheck's not coming in. But now I'm doing something I love as opposed to doing something that I just simply despised. So the seasonal part of the business is kind of tough, but it's not enough to break me yet. You know, I still got it.